D&D advice is something that we give a lot on this channel. It's like half the purpose of the channel in the first place. But a few times, we delve into the depths of Reddit to find the worst D&D advice that the people can offer. And once again, we're going to be doing that because I'm going on vacation and I needed a quick video to make, and you guys really seem to enjoy these. So today, I have found some more terrible DM advice from Reddit, and we are going to commentate to see if it really is that bad. It may be, it may not be, who knows? Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, we're starting off with one that might even be a hot take. There is no such thing as a balanced encounter because you cannot quantify creativity, spoken with such rage. To be clear here, he advocated ignoring all challenge rating, just tossing in whatever felt dramatic for roleplay. Okay, so I can kind of see where this is coming from, but at the same time, yeah, this is pretty bad advice. While it is really hard to balance D&D encounters, you can absolutely ballpark it and get at least close to balance, or at least as close to balance as you can. It's really hard to quantify balance, especially when you're talking about Dungeons & Dragons, because with all TTRPGs, each group is going to be completely different. And it's not just stuff like class and race combinations, it's also stuff like how many people are in your group, how experienced are they with the game, how experienced is a dungeon master with the game. Also, is the arena trying to kill the players too? How many encounters do they have before the battle that we're talking about? Balanced is incredibly hard to quantify in D&D, and that's why when people talk about balanced encounters, it's really hard to, discuss this sort of thing. Matt Colville made a really great video about this. Now, when it comes to throwing in monsters for dramatic flair or for story reasons, I also understand where this guy is coming from, but you shouldn't just throw a red dragon at a level 3 party because, oh my god, this would be dramatic. No, that would be just really frustrating for your players because they would stand no chance. You need to throw things in for story reasons, but also make sure that the combat has some sort of interesting tension to it. They don't need to be destined to win. I've run plenty of combats where I know that the players are probably going to lose and have to come back and fight another day. However, I make sure that the players are at least aware that what they're going against is something that is really, really powerful, and give them chances to do something other than fight. Maybe a chance to do something like run away and initiate a cool chase sequence. Changing up the goal can make sure that combat stays fresh. Now, of course, at the end here, I don't think we should abolish challenge rating entirely, though I think the system does need some sort of revamp to make it a little bit more clear what it's talking about. But yeah, you can ballpark a balanced D&D encounter and get close. Just be ready to do a little bit of extra game design even after initiative is called. Balance the game as much as you can, but be ready for a little bit of chaos because, it's Dungeons & Dragons combat. That kind of thing is bound to happen. Maybe not the worst, but something I see far too often is, if a player isn't playing how you want them to, just kick them off the table. Now, I have seen a lot of stories where people are playing with their friends and the group is just not compatible. And yes, I do agree that you shouldn't just kick someone off a table, but I do agree to a degree. My agreement ends at a point. You can't just keep someone on the table just because you're their friend. And sometimes there are parts of your game that you're just not going to want compromised. If you want to run a heavy roleplay game and everyone at the table wants to run a heavy roleplay game, and your one friend does not want that at all, he hates role-playing, he doesn't like it, he just wants to do combat, that's fine for him. That's a perfectly valid playstyle, but the problem is that that kind of attitude is going to bring down the feeling for the rest of the group. The whole table is going to suffer, and sometimes it's not enough to just find a middle ground. That's really easy to say, oh, you just need to find a middle ground between the two extremes, but I mean, that's not always going to work. If someone just doesn't want to roleplay, they don't want to roleplay, and that's just how it is sometimes. And that means that sometimes walking away and separating, that is the best solution for everyone at the table. Now, of course, I agree that you don't want to kick someone off because of one bad experience or one bad session even. However, after you have a conversation about it, you need to weigh your options. Sometimes separation is the best thing for everyone at the table, but make sure to have that discussion. Don't pull a ban hammer out just because of one bad experience. I've seen a lot of examples of players setting in motion a complicated plan only for the DM to step in at the end and say, that doesn't work because thing your characters would have been aware of, which I could have reminded you about 30 minutes ago. players will definitely get themselves in trouble, but it's important to remember that their perception of the world, and let's be honest, their memory of even their own character's abilities, is limited. Now, of course, player decisions should have consequences, and I can see having players face consequences for things they forgot being interesting, but it's not a trick I would pull too often. Look, we as DMs are always going to have greater awareness about the game, and of course, you could say something like, please just take notes and you won't forget things. But even when players take notes, there are things they're going to miss, things that they're going to forget. That is going to happen inevitably. That's especially true if players are taking a lot of notes, because when you have so many notes to run through, you're not going to remember everything. So yeah, I do think that I think it is okay to occasionally have players face consequences for something that they forgot. But again, it's not a trick I would pull very often. I've done this once. The situation was my players were trying to scam a powerful vampire lord, and one of the players dropped the name of a person they're working with, who was a famous con artist and was setting up the scam. This gave away to the vampire lord that, oh crap, I'm being scammed. These people are working with a con artist, and therefore the vampire tipped off his buddies and set up an ambush for the players, and they had to completely change the plan. It went from clever scam to dungeon murder fest, which, that was fun, but the point is, yeah, I did punish the players because of a major detail that they forgot. They dropped a sensitive name in front of the big bad evil guy, and yeah, I didn't really foreshadow properly that they caught on to that. The players weren't upset about this, but it's not a trick I'm gonna pull again in this campaign, because at the time, it felt kind of cheap. It felt like I was using my DM higher power or whatever to trick the players, even if they didn't feel that way, and even if that wasn't fully true. Again, not a trick I'm going to pull again. I usually like it when players face consequences for decisions that they make, not stuff that they forgot. It makes it more satisfying, I guess, even for the players. When the players realize, oh, that decision we made that could have messed us up really bad, or that decision we made was really, really good. Good job, guys. It feels neat even for players to realize that the decisions they make with the knowledge of the game world have consequences. It's less fun when they realize, oh, that minor detail we forgot a while ago just really screwed us over. Whoops! Like, that's not nearly as satisfying. The terrible advice here is basically to not tell your players, are you sure, when they forget something. Are you sure is a classic DM quote, and it's something that DMs say a lot for a reason. Sometimes we need to make sure that players are sure they want to do something, and sometimes we use it to dissuade players from doing something really stupid. That sort of thing is not bad at all. It's something a lot of DMs do for a reason, because it helps to keep players on track and to help them make better decisions for the game, especially if sometimes they forget something. Forgetting things is natural. Of course, like I said earlier, note-taking can help to curtail this, but it's not going to fix everything, and sometimes DMs helping their players out will be greatly appreciated. Of course, it will also depend on the table they are playing at, but generally I think DMs giving their players a respectful nudge is perfectly valid. Just make your own campaign setting, without realizing that not every DM is a massive world-building nutjob like me. Alright, yeah, making your own campaign setting. It's something I love doing, and it's something I recommend to dungeon masters everywhere if they want to do it. If you want to world build and you love world building like I do, then making your own campaign setting can be incredibly rewarding. But at the same time, I'm well aware that making your own campaign setting is a really daunting task sometimes. It can be really hard to make your own campaign setting. I mean, let alone creating your own NPCs, your own towns, all of that, but creating deeper lore behind your world. That kind of stuff can be really, really hard. I have recently run into multiple roadblocks when it comes to the lore of my world. I've developed it out a lot by this point. I've written a lot for this homebrew world I've created called Eris, and unfortunately, at this point, I have run into a couple of pitfalls in some of my old world building that I'm working to fix. A few retcons here and there to fix old writing mistakes that I made. Because yeah, world building is hard, and you are bound to make mistakes. I would not recommend world building an entire homebrew world for your first campaign. The main reason I say that is because when you're DMing for a first time, you have so much stuff to keep track of. On top of that, writing an entire world and lots of custom NPCs and custom cities and towns and all of that, it's a lot. Even if you're stealing stuff. I mean, I steal plenty of stuff when it comes to my world building, but even still, I work for hours and hours on end putting all that stuff together. It's still a lot of work. Of course, if you really want to create a homebrew world, I'm not going to stop you because, again, it can be an incredibly rewarding experience. If you want to create a homebrew world, do it. If you don't feel like you're up to the task quite yet, that's perfectly valid, and there's nothing wrong with running a module. That doesn't make you a lesser DM in any way, shape, or form. You're just doing what's comfortable to you, and that is great. In fact, that is the best thing you can do, because if you're not having a good time as a DM and you're overworking yourself, the game will suffer and your players aren't going to have as much fun, and therefore, you have successfully failed as a dungeon master. Make sure to do what you can to make sure you are having a good time. If world building is good for you, great. If it's not, also great. Using homebrew is great, especially if it's your first time. Now, I love homebrew. I use homebrew a lot. A lot of homebrew monsters, homebrew subclasses, homebrew items. I use so many homebrew items. Griffin Saddlebag. I'm convinced that Griffin from Griffin Saddlebag was sent down by the heavens to bless us peasant dungeon masters with his incredible homebrew magical items. I love homebrew. But yeah, first time DMs, again, like I said with the world building thing, you have so much to worry about, and testing homebrew and thinking through how homebrew can be used in your game, that is a substantial amount of work. Now, of course, I think we also should acknowledge the fact that Dungeons & Dragons, the base vanilla game Dungeons & Dragons, has a lot of stuff in it, and some of it is fairly overpowered. I mean, damn, I love Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This is a great book, but it's got some stuff in there that can be considered pretty damn powerful and could imbalance some games. There are group compositions, for example, that could really imbalance games. Most power gaming builds don't use homebrew items, right? They use stuff in the base game that could really shatter the game too. Which, yeah, I think we should acknowledge that homebrew is not the only overpowered stuff on the block. But yeah, of course, homebrew, especially homebrew you find on stuff like D&D Wiki, for example, can be really broken. I do think homebrew fills a void, and I love looking for homebrew that's like specific to something that I want. Like, very often I will think of an idea in my head, and I'll be like, how do I actually like work that idea into my game mechanically? Like, for example, a giant that's wearing a ship as a suit of armor and has a giant cannon strapped to his arm. Like, how do I actually do that in a mechanical sense? I am sure there's some homebrew guy out there that's made that exact creature somewhere in the world. I just need to look it up on Reddit and I will probably find it. That's where homebrew is really helpful and really useful. The problem is, like I said earlier, balance. You need to think about how homebrew is going to affect your game, especially if you're putting homebrew into the hands of the players. I give my players so many homebrew magical items, and I spend a long time curating those items because I love loot. I love giving my players tons of magical loot, but I also don't want that loot to like break the game. So I need to curate it. I need to make sure it's good, right? And I need to make sure that it fits what I'm trying to do with this campaign. So yeah, I love homebrew, as you can plainly see, but I do acknowledge that for first-time DMs and even veteran DMs, homebrew can be really hard to integrate. It takes a lot of work, and if you don't want to use it, I think that's perfectly valid. The DM is always right, or some other variation. Now, this is a bit more of a complicated case. I don't think that this is bad advice necessarily. The DM is always right has an origin. The reason people say that is because the DM needs power over the game to a degree. The DM needs power to make decisions, make rulings, all that sort of thing. And if players are constantly arguing with the DM, the game grinds to a halt. That's where a lot of these more mild horror stories lie. In games that move incredibly slow because the DM is getting questions all the time. However, I think the mentality of the DM is always right, no matter what, is a slippery slope, because it can lead to DMs having a bit of a power trip. Not necessarily like a real power trip, but the idea that a DM cannot be questioned at all can lead to DMs who can kind of come off like a dictator, and I don't think that's good at all. Now, do I like arguments at the table? No, I don't. I try to minimize them as much as I can at my own tables, and my party are well aware that if they want something changed at the game, they either need to make sure that they convince me in like 10 seconds, or we can have a further discussion outside the game. But it's that last part that's really important. I at least entertain discussion. I want my players to talk to me. I want them to criticize me, not necessarily in a mean way, but I want them to tell me what they think is going wrong in the game. If they think an ability is underpowered or overpowered, if they thought an encounter was bad for whatever reason, I want them to tell me. And if I keep on enforcing to them that I am always right no matter what, they're not going to have the confidence to do that. I'm not opening myself up to their feedback because I am always right, which is just not a great mentality. I understand where this line comes from. You want to minimize the arguments at the game. You want the game to move on because you want to have fun. You want your players to have fun, and arguing about rules and whatnot is not fun. That's just, I don't enjoy that. A lot of other people don't enjoy that. It's not great. But you do need to make sure that people are willing and open to criticism. You need to make sure that you are willing and open to feedback. You need to make sure your players are comfortable giving that feedback. And I think enforcing this rule to a dictatorial degree can really break that down. Spend $200 on the game before you play. It helps to be invested. I'm not going to lie. I follow this advice in my work life. I often invest financially into projects because, I want incentive to finish them, and money is a pretty good incentive. But that's work. This isn't work. This is Dungeons & Dragons, a game that you are playing for fun. The only investment that you should have is the fun that you have when you are playing. There's this idea that DMing is like a job, and it's like a burden that you have to carry, but DMing should be enjoyable. Now, it does have more work than when you play. You have to prep the game. But DMing also does have its perks. DMing can be incredibly rewarding, as I've said many times. I love being the dungeon master, even if it is a lot of work. I'm not doing it because of a financial investment I've put into DMing. I'm not doing it because I dropped a few bucks on the virtual tabletop that I'm using. It's because I love to DM. The act of being the dungeon master is the reward for me. That's it. The enjoyment that my players get from my game is the only reward that I need. It's not because of investment. In fact, if you need to invest in being a dungeon master in order to justify being a dungeon master, I think you should probably stick to being a player. I honestly think that if you're a dungeon master only because of obligation or because it's some kind of burden to you, I think that you should probably just stick to being a player, because if it's a burden, then it's not going to be fun. If it's not fun, then you're not going to be prepping as well, and if you're not prepping as well, then the game isn't going to be enjoyable for the rest of the party. It all falls apart, right? There's nothing wrong with sticking to playing, by the way. Sticking to playing is perfectly valid. If that's where you get enjoyment, that's great. Just stick to what you enjoy. Stick to what you have fun with, because this is a game, after all. The goal is not to have fun. It's for the players to have fun. I know I just talked about this, and I've talked about this so many times, but this is a stance that is unbelievably common for what it is, and something that I see way too often for me not to talk about it. Your DM should be enjoying the game. If you are a DM, you should be having fun with this tabletop role-playing game. You're playing too. Obviously, you're playing in a different way, but you should still be having a good time. That is most important. You don't spend 6 hours prepping this game just so that you can torture yourself or treat it like a job. You should be doing that because you love being a dungeon master, like I said before. This idea and this mentality goes beyond just dungeon master. I also see this applied to players, where players are told that they need to overthrow their dungeon master, or they need to outwit, completely destroy, beat their dungeon master, defeat them in combat. But yeah, no, we're working together to create a story. Now, not to say that players can't outsmart their dungeon master's monsters or outsmart the bad guys the dungeon master is playing. I mean, seriously, my favorite Critical Role combat moment is probably this.
Both Pike and Grog to make charisma saving throws, please.
Oh, but I counterspelled it at 8th level. Ooh. That's why I got closer, motherfucker.
If you know the context behind that, you know why people were freaking out, because that was awesome. Sam Riegel tricked Vecna and also tricked Matt, essentially. He tricked Matt Mercer, his DM. But that was all in good fun. Sam Riegel isn't trying to overthrow Matt or prevent Matt from having fun. He's having fun too. Everyone is having a good time in this moment. It's all in good fun because this is a game. But this idea that players need to overthrow their DM, stop their DM from making decisions, stop their DM from telling their story is something that I see so often. Everyone should be working together. We are a group working together to create a story that we all enjoy. Not to say that DMs need to enforce a story onto players that they need to accept with some kind of horrible railroad. That is the opposite side of the coin, and it's just as bad. Both sides are bad. But I see the former side, the side where players need to like overthrow their DM and crush them in their game. I think that is way more accepted than it should be. Not to say that's like a common thing that I see all the time. It's just I see it enough that I notice, and it bothers me every time it comes up. I know I went on a bit of a salty rant there. I apologize. But yeah, point is, we should be having a good time with this game. I know I say it over and over and over again. It's just a shame because I see so many people thinking of being a dungeon master like being a chore or being some kind of job that you have an obligation to fulfill and that's it. You just need to do your 9 to 5 and get out as soon as you can, which I just think it's a real shame. I love being a dungeon master. I love this. The feeling that I get when my players are enjoying my game, the feeling I get when I know that my campaign is going well, the feeling I get when I feel the creative juices flowing, I'm creating something cool for my players to experience, that's awesome. It feels really good. And it's not just for my players to experience it, I'm experiencing it alongside them, and that is the greatest feeling in the world. That's why I love this game. That's why I play it every week. That's why I spend hours prepping. I just want more people to feel that. And honestly, don't be afraid to be a dungeon master. If you are up to the task, yeah, it's gonna be hard sometimes, but it's not a job, it's not a chore. It can be the most rewarding experience of your gaming life. I'm serious. I love this because it's fun, not because it's just a chore or something, or because it's my job. I love it because I love it. That is all. Alright, with that soapy message out of the way, we are going to end today's episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips. I'm particularly liking the lighting on this one. The pink and blue, really think it comes together. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do check out our RPG Horror Story series, where we go over the best, the worst of Dungeons and Dragons. And also, while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment rotten advice to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Lessons, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.